All right, I want to read something quickly, and then we're going to break quickly, and we'll talk to Ryan Nobles. Let's see. Donna, you have offended me. I belong to no bad groups, but feel these items symbolize history, just like Ellis Island is part of history. My great-grandfather died because they turned him and others away. Trump was wrong at his comments. It was uncalled for, but I assure you, because you believe in history, right or wrong, you are not a KKK or Nazi. What's next? The cross offends people, so Firehouse Christmas, et cetera, et cetera. Have I said anything that doesn't agree with Donna here?
Well, I don't think I think what she's alluding to is the president was saying that some of the people who were there were not white supremacists. They were protesting the taking down of statues.
But he didn't say that. He said some of the people there were good people, and you're right. They were there protesting the taking down of the statue. Okay, that part I do understand what you're saying. But I'm all. Just so you know, I think this is very dangerous to be running around the country taking statues down of our history. It is difficult, and it should be done through a process like Baltimore did it last night. It should be done legally and through a process, and maybe they don't come down, because how do we rewrite history? It's a part of our history.
I agree with you, and I'm not saying that the other people that were there for the protesting of taking down statues. I was just trying to, paraphrase, I guess, what the president was saying. But, I mean, even if you think about that, it's possible maybe people were there that were just upset about the statues. But whatever the cause is, right, you're going to some movement, some rally, right? And it's like, well, we're going to be side by side with the white supremacists or whoever it is, ISIS.
Because remember, it was a white supremacist permit. Those are the ones that had the permit. Let's not forget that. While there may have been people there that were thoughtful people like Donna that just felt that we're going too far with this political correctness, I understand that. But I'm not denouncing any of that. I think there's.
I'm just saying, even if you agreed with him, wouldn't you sit this one out?
Sit this one out.
I'm going to go next weekend.
You're going to be marching with the KKK and with Nazis and with white supremacists. And Donna, I know Donna, and Donna would not have. She would have passed on this event. I mean, right? You bring up a very good point. Donna, by no means am I trying to offend people because I believe exactly as you do. However, I did hear one commentator yesterday talk about the fact that, and it might have been Don Lemon, who I despise, Ryan, but I thought he was articulate and well-spoken yesterday, and just articulated, what I'm trying to say is he articulated his personal feeling of what the president did yesterday incredibly well.
Well,
he said that imagine if you're in Germany and there was a high school called Hitler High, and you're Jewish. Would you have a problem with that, Ryan? And that gave it a completely different perception for me, anyway.
You know, Bill, it was interesting thinking about going on with you this morning, and at the end of last week, before what happened in Charlottesville took place, I was thinking that our conversation today would be about how, once again, we were talking about the course correction for the president, that he brought on a chief of staff who seemed to be whipping people into shape, and that they seemed to be focused in the right direction, and perhaps he had an opportunity to rescue his presidency. But the way he's just mishandled this situation over the past couple of days is just baffling. And you don't have to look to the president's opponents anymore to find the disappointment in his talk, the way he's talked over the past couple of days. I mean, there's a chorus of Republican leaders in Congress who are, specifically condemning what he said.
Yeah.
There are some that aren't willing to go far enough to mention him by name. But I think what this does is just hobbles his presidency. I mean, and you said it pretty well there. I mean, why would you, if you were a Jewish person, if you were an African American, if you were any member of a group that these people that went and protested in Charlottesville purposely aimed to suppress, why would you ever want to work with this president if he is not willing to stand up and say there is a clear difference here, there's not a moral equivalency? Yeah. And at this point, he just seems incapable of doing that.
I use the analogy, and people are saying that it's not a fair analogy. I think it's totally fair of the father whose child was raped by a pedophile, and the father attacks the pedophile. At the end of the day, we all know both were wrong. The father never should have taken matters into his own hands. Police told him not to. In my mind, there's a specific case here. But you don't go on and put the father and the pedophile on the same stage. They aren't equivalent here. The father was wrong, absolutely wrong. But you're going to come out and defend the pedophile? I don't think so.
Yeah, and I mean, if you've seen any of the video, and, I had colleagues that were in Charlottesville. I know Charlottesville very well, having lived in Richmond for 7 years. I've been there for stories on many occasions. First of all, this is a small community. This isn't a big, sprawling city. The area was very contained, and to see the volume of people that were there.
Yeah.
And the number of people that showed up from these white supremacist groups, fully armed, dressed like they were members of a militia, almost to hide the fact that, representing who they are, there were people that mistook some of these people for members of the National Guard. They came there in an aggressive posture. And if you haven't seen the Vice piece on this yet, there was a Vice reporter who was with one of these groups throughout the entire time. And when you watch that, which, she does show that there were some violent reaction to this group, but you're 100% right, Bill. There is a level of disgust that comes with this type of people, of which it's impossible to just ignore. And the level of their aggressiveness during this time frame is what led to this. And you cannot ignore the fact that one of their members got into a car and drove right into the middle of a group of people with the express aim of harming and eventually killing someone. So, this is such a pivotal time in our country right now, and I think it is opening up a lot of eyes for people that don't necessarily understand what these symbols mean. And you were talking about the Confederate monuments before you brought me on, and I honestly think, having been born and raised in upstate New York, I spent 30 years of my life there, and then moving to the South, and I moved to the capital of the Confederacy. There is a different viewpoint of the Confederacy in the Old South.
Yeah.
There's a romantic notion of it. There's a view that somehow this group of people was fighting the good fight, and that, the vast majority of them didn't believe in slavery. And that is the whitewashing of our history. And so that is exactly the aim of groups like this, to come out and say that, what we are trying to do is defend white heritage. I don't necessarily think that at this point in our history there's a necessity to defend white heritage.
Right.
White Americans have defined our heritage for the past 200 years, and the idea that somehow it is worth it to march down a city street armed to the hilt in an aggressive posture to protect these monuments, to me, is baffling. And the point I'll make about this
to provoke. Remember, their outcome was exactly what they intended.
Exactly. And the other point I'd make about this is that the elected city council of Charlottesville, which was a group of people that was elected by the people who live in that community, decided through a democratic process that they were going to bring the Robert E. Lee Monument down in that city. And guess what? That's their right as elected leaders. And if you don't like that, if you live in Charlottesville, you can vote those people out of office.
Right.
That is perfectly part of the democratic process.
Yeah.
What's not part of the democratic process is to come from somewhere else, and the vast majority of these people were not Virginians, and march down those streets in a way to provoke the type of anger that occurred there. That's how fascist movements start. That's how ugly things begin and fester and infect the country. And that's why it's so important for the President of the United States to stand up and definitively reject that kind of ideology.
And that's why that press conference was so dangerous for the country yesterday. In my opinion, it was dangerous. I think he's incited this movement. There is now a white supremacy movement that is coming out of the holes. They're coming out of their bunkers, and they're planning protests all across major cities throughout the country this weekend.
Yeah, and, in defense of the president, you cannot pick and choose who supports you, right? I mean, especially when you're president of the United States. And I'm sure that when Barack Obama was president, there were all kinds of people of different stripes who he didn't necessarily hold the same ideology as, but for whatever reason, they latched onto him as a leader and they called him their own. And so, I'm not saying that it's Donald Trump's fault that white supremacists support him. But when white supremacists come out and claim that the actions that you've taken as a candidate and now as a leader have emboldened you, it would be the responsibility of that leader to reject that and say, I don't know where you're coming from. That's not a part of who I am. You've interpreted my positions on these issues incorrectly, and that is not something that I support.
Well, Lindsey,
and he just refuses to do that. He's had multiple opportunities to stand up and firmly reject that type of ideology, and for some reason he continues to try and create this moral equivocation, which just doesn't make any sense.
Lindsey Graham, who comes from an area that is, a great deal of KKK history, Lindsey Graham came out last weekend, this past weekend, and basically said, I don't, if you're a KKK person and you think you have a candidate in me or I'm your guy, I'm not your guy. I don't want you supporting me. I mean, that's pretty bold out of a guy like Lindsey Graham in a state where probably not a smart thing to do. Yeah, there's history there.
Yeah, right. And this is the problem that I think the Republican Party is dealing with, and it is, racial ideology is not a black and white issue. Forgive the pun. There are broad stripes of racial ideology, and you might not be someone who carries a Nazi flag or wears a KKK hood, but you might believe that that African Americans or Jewish people or Native Americans don't deserve the same level of access to certain things that you do, and you may have a latent bias that you're just not in touch with, and I think that what the Republican Party is seeing now is that there is a division of their party. It's not the whole party. It's not even a majority of their party, but it's a significant enough block where that's why I think you see the president in many respects using like dog whistles to try and talk about these things. And I really think in many ways it defines the future of the Republican Party. Are they going to be a party that completely rejects this? And if they lose 5% of their support, it might be as small as that much. I mean, I want to be clear that the vast majority of Republicans do not believe this. And in general, this is a very small part of our population. But the more you allow it to fester, the more you don't stand up and definitively say that it's wrong, the more that it grows. It's a cancer, and it just cannot be allowed to grow.
We've been talking about this since the beginning of the year, since the inauguration, is that as he does things and things happen, he's beginning to erode, not just to forget the base. The base is there, but it's the key is eroding your Republican support in Congress. And yesterday was, I believe, the turning point where he lost Republicans yesterday.
Well, Bill, let's find out, because, I spent all day yesterday, first of all, reaching out to congressional offices, trolling Twitter accounts of all of these Republican leaders to get that exact sense. And I agree with you. Could this be the tipping point?
Yeah.
But frankly, I only found, a handful of Republican leaders that were willing to stand up and name the president specifically and say that what the president said was wrong. There were, dozens of Republican leaders that tweeted that they reject white supremacism and the KKK and Nazis. That's all great, and it should have been done. But, I think of Marco Rubio was one. Scott Taylor's a congressman from Virginia, was on CNN this morning. He's a second. I mean, John McCain, I think, did as well.
Which you'd expect, and Lindsey Graham, you'd expect,
But there were a lot, many more who gave this kind of shallow statement about rejecting Nazism, which is not necessarily the most courageous stand,
right,
but refused to mention the president by name. So let's see how that plays out today. And as this festers in the water, will more Republicans take a more defiant tone against the president? And then the other thing I think we have to watch for is how do his closest advisors feel about this? Gary Cohn, who is one of his economic council chairman, and is currently in the process of crafting his tax reform plan, maybe one of the president's most closest advisors right now. He is a Jewish American, a proud Jewish American who funds Jewish centers all around the country. How did he feel? So he was standing behind the president while he was making these remarks tomorrow. Does someone like Gary Cohn continue to stand by the president's side? His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is an Orthodox Jew. His daughter converted to Judaism. How do these people feel about what the president had to say? And more than just members of Congress.
One of those Vice News interviews that they were interviewing, one of the white supremacists who said, well, we're actually searching for a candidate that's more racist than President Trump. A president who doesn't give his daughter to a Jew. That was tough. Rob says, let's be honest, Republicans are not the only ones who are racist. I don't think we're saying that here. Obviously, the Democrats, that's where it all came from.
No, and I'm actually working on a story right now that's going to post on CNN.com, and Rob is right. Especially when it comes to this issue of Confederate monuments.
Right. This is all Democrat. Yeah.
I mean, there's probably more Republicans and Democrats that support keeping Confederate monuments up, but there was a bill that went through the General Assembly in Virginia in 2016, which was basically a law that would prevent localities from doing what Charlottesville did, and bringing down these monuments. And it passed the General Assembly 86-16, and so that meant there were a lot of Democrats that supported it. So, especially in the Deep South, there are definitely still connections to the Democratic Party and racism. I'm not suggesting that if you think a Confederate monument should stand, that's racist.
How do both parties react to this? It's going to be interesting. I'm running out of time, Ryan. Quickly, General Kelly. If just a facial expression could speak, wow.
Yeah, and our White House team has said that he was very unhappy with what happened yesterday. He's unhappy with what happened over the weekend. But, Bill, this is what we talked about before. General Kelly may be a man that has literally moved armies in his job, but he's never had the challenge of controlling someone like Donald Trump.
Oh, this is a whole different world. There is no doubt. Ryan, thank you. I got to go. We appreciate it.
But keeping the president is the difficult one.
It is a different world. Ryan, thanks so much. Ryan Noble, CNN.